Well, amid the skirl of the pipes and the crack of artillery, the country paused on Friday to honor the veterans of Afghanistan. On Parliament Hill, thousands gathered to watch as soldiers, sailors, and airmen paraded. Also honored were the RCMP, corrections officers, and local police, who all did tours of duty during the 12-year mission. And, of course, on everyone's mind, the 158 soldiers who did not return. We requested an interview with the Minister of National Defense or his parliamentary secretary, but they were not made available for interviews this week. So we are joined now by the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of International Trade, and a veteran himself, I might add, Erin O'Toole. Mr. O'Toole, awfully good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thinking back to Friday and that ceremony to honor the troops right across the country, but here, coming back from war, as a veteran, you would know this is awfully difficult. It's made easier when there are people there to cheer you on. Before I leave, though, the honoring of the troops, which I think is absolutely necessary in this country, when that Canadian flag was taken down for the last time in Kabul, the hauling down ceremony, there wasn't a single member of your government in attendance. Why?
That's a good question. The mission in Afghanistan had three phases, as you probably know, Tom. The beginning phase in Kabul, the really hard combat phase in Kandahar, and then the final peace and security and the training of the Afghan National Army. Our government, the Prime Minister, and starting with the previous government, in fact, had trips with both our Prime Minister Harper, veterans ministers, national defense ministers quite regularly. So there was a presence of our government on the ground regularly.
But Mr. O'Toole, I can tell you one thing, because I was there, and I spoke to the men and women in uniform, and it was noticed that their government didn't show up.
Well, this is the quandary you face as a parliamentarian. I'm a new one after having served in the military. We were honoring the service on Friday, and it was a wonderful ceremony on Parliament Hill. There's still people that will criticize that, and you didn't do enough. Some people say you're not spending enough money. Some people saying there's politics in it. Well, parliamentarians make the hardest decision we have is to send men and women of the Canadian Forces into harm's way. And so we as a government wanted to honor what was the longest sustained mission in a combat sense for Canada, Afghanistan. 12 years, 40,000 people. We should have had someone at that ceremony, Tom, but I can tell you from talking to Peter MacKay before I was elected, who went to Afghanistan most Christmases, from the Prime Minister on down, who called family members. Our government tried to recognize their service both in Afghanistan and in Ottawa, and I think Friday was a good culmination. And talking to some of the families, in some ways, nice closure for them in terms of knowing that the end of the mission was marked by the government.
Fair enough. Let's move on to honoring an old mission to looking ahead to a new mission. You heard last week the top general at NATO saying that we might have to consider putting troops permanently in Eastern Europe as this new Cold War sort of takes on a little bit of heat. Are we prepared as a country to station our troops in Eastern Europe, and if so, for how long?
Well, it's interesting you say that. At the Day of Honor, I was speaking to some veterans, and it's quite surreal for many veterans, including those I served with in the late 90s. Afghanistan has ended, and it almost seems like we're rewinding to the Cold War, where the Canadian Forces was pre-9/11. We are ready, Tom. Our Canadian Forces F-18s have already deployed. They're on the ground in Romania as part of the overall NATO response. We have HMCS Regina dispatched. Now, I had the privilege of serving with the Navy on Sea Kings, and we always have a ship with the NATO fleet in the Atlantic.
Are we prepared to be in Eastern Europe permanently?
Well, this will be something that we work with our NATO allies on. I think we also have some members of our Army training in Poland. So what we're showing is that Canada, like we have since World War I through to Afghanistan, will be there with our allies.
Well, let's talk about money, though, because apparently we don't know how long our troops are going to be on this mission, whether they're going to be deployed there permanently. Your colleague, James Bezan, who's the Parliamentary Secretary for National Defense, has called on his own government to drastically increase military spending, to put it up to 1.7% of GDP, which is what NATO wants. We're at 1.2% and falling. Do you agree with Mr. Bezan that we should drastically increase defense spending in this country?
I'm never one that likes to pick a number or a decimal place like that. What I say, Tom, and I think our government has shown, is we want to make sure that our men and women in uniform have the right equipment to do the job. And in fact, to the National Day of Honor, you saw C-17s, you saw aircraft fly over that our government acquired to make sure that they had the tools to do the job. And that will include the new
Mr. Bazan's talking about billions more dollars.
I think you will see, if there needs to be a prolonged presence in Europe, like Canada, we had bases in Germany, as you know, in the heart of the Cold War. We will work with our allies to make sure Canada is a part. We will be a part recognizing our share of the mission.
So are we prepared to spend that type of money?
If it comes to that, I think all NATO partners, and I was with the EU ambassadors yesterday at EU Day, everyone hopes that a diplomatic solution will be found here, and that Mr. Putin will see that NATO and Europe as a whole does not tolerate aggression. And so there needs to be the diplomatic channels, but in some cases NATO also has to show that we're prepared to stand with allies and neighbors to make sure that there's security in Europe.
Mr. O'Toole, I appreciate your time today. Thanks very much for dropping by.
Thanks.